Studios in downtown Little Rock. This is Capitol View.
And good Sunday morning to you. Welcome into Capitol View. I'm Jay Bir. Arkansas is now entering its second month of fighting COVID-19, and Representative French Hill is fighting the pandemic for us here in Washington. He joins us now while being back home here in Arkansas. And Congressman, we certainly welcome you, and we appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
Let's get right into it here. Obviously, you've been appointed to the CARES Act Congressional Oversight Commission. It's quite a mouthful there. I guess, what are you guys being tasked with specifically?
This is a bipartisan oversight commission. It's a watchdog group that was in the statute, and it's designed to be the overseers for the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve in how they design and implement this economic preservation money. For example, how are they making the loans to the aviation industry that's been so terribly damaged by the coronavirus?
And I guess sort of in regards to opening things up further, you were selected for President Trump's Opening America Up Again Congressional group. So again, I guess going forward here, what's sort of the task with that group?
Well, you know, the president's been meeting with health professionals, with economic companies of all sizes and shapes to find out, well, what's the best way for us to get our economy back to full capacity. He also has senators and congressmen that he's asked to do this. We're bringing him ideas from our constituents. We're bringing him conditions on the ground about what's happening in our states, what Arkansas is doing versus other places on trying to get the economy back open.
And I guess to what account do you take just the different regions of just the situations? Obviously, Arkansas, much different than the Northeast, much different than the West. The Midwest kind of has its own issues and set of circumstances. How do you kind of balance all that out when trying to open up everything across the country?
Well, it's a big challenge. The one thing we know for sure is it's going to be unique to each circumstance, whether you're in an urban area or rural area. How dense is your population? Arkansas has been blessed because we're spread out. I think Governor Hutchinson's been very prudent and balanced in his approach about fighting the virus and containing it, as well as his approach to opening it up. But it's a big difference. And when you think about the big urban areas like New York or California, they represent a huge part of our economy. They're going to come out of this a lot slower.
And you mentioned Governor Hutchinson. I guess another layer to this is balancing those state decisions with the national level.
It is, but President Trump has laid out the phases that his health care task force has suggested, the phased opening. And each of our governors are adopting their phases based on those national characteristics.
All right, let's move into the Paycheck Protection Program. Finally got another round of that. I know the one big thing that a lot of people were sticking to here, at least in the first round of the PPP, was how do some of these corporations, we saw Shake Shack give back $20 million, the Los Angeles Lakers, for example. How are those types of businesses receiving money when it's really designed to go towards small businesses?
That's a very good question. When the Senate drafted that bill, they were very generous in their definition. They simply said if the small business organization had fewer than 500 people, it was qualified. And they were more generous even for restaurant companies. They said 500 people per location. And they didn't ban public companies. So that's what's created, I think, this confusion. Secretary Mnuchin, our Treasury Secretary, has tried to qualify that, provide guidance. And I think you'll see that the vast majority of this money has gone to small businesses. The typical loan is under $200,000 in the first tranche, and in this second tranche, it's well under $100,000.
And HR 6399, I know it's something you're working on here, the Securing America's Vaccines for Emergencies. It's the SAVE Act. Basically will be to amend the Defense Production Act. What's going on with that? And I know it's kind of with that, we're fighting China to a certain degree, or at least depending on them less when it comes to the national supply chain.
Right. It's about the supply chain. The Defense Production Act was passed when Harry Truman was our president. It was to command resources in the country for aviation, for electronics, for critical national security reasons in case of shortage. Now, over the years, it's been added to be energy, certain kinds of minerals, and I propose that we add medical supplies, vaccines, and pharmaceuticals as major national security items under the Defense Production Act. And this, as you say, will result in us being diversified from China in our medical supply chain and have more of it back here in the United States.
So I guess the question would be begged is, how do we bring some of that manufacturing back over stateside?
Right. Well, it's mostly in our chemical industry. This is not the end use of making a pill, for example, by Pfizer. This is really in the chemical composites that go into drugs, both generic drugs as well as in a lot of those materials that go into PPE, protective equipment for our medical folks. We would have a strategy that would encourage multiple sources, encourage some sources being in the United States in case of a pandemic, and diversify that supply chain over a period of time using our market-based economy. We can do this. China dominates those critical elements in pharmaceuticals. You'd be surprised. They make all the ibuprofen, for example, and many other key drugs that Americans take every day.
I guess the one thing on a lot of folks' mind is we've seen one round of stimulus checks. Are there still talks of potentially a second round, even into a third round, even as things start to slowly open up in terms of the economy and maybe there's a slight sense of normalcy starting to creep back into society?
Well, Jay, you raised a good point, which is we've put $3 trillion in direct taxpayer money into the economy for April, May, and June. Now think about that. That's 60% of what we spend in the federal government in an entire year on everything from Medicare to national parks to aircraft carriers. So I think my view is we ought to assess how much we've done, how successful has it been as the economy opens back up, and be very cautious about immediately going out and spending more federal money. And if we do, make sure we very narrowly target it to the gaps that we discover.
All right. Well, there is plenty going on up there in Washington, despite a lot of things being shut down.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely, Frenchio. We certainly appreciate the time. We'll do it again soon.